Hello everyone, welcome to a new edition of Strategic Insights. I am Professor Kalyan Bhaskar. I am a faculty member at XLRI Jamshedpur, and Strategic Insight is a new initiative of the strategic management area of XLRI Jamshedpur, where the idea is we get people from the field of practice, people from academia, people who are experts to talk and come and have a conversation about strategy topics. The whole idea of decomplexifying strategy. And with me today we have Professor Arindam Mondal from our area, and we have Professor Vishal Gupta, who has flown all the way from US to here. And now I invite Professor Arindam to just welcome our guest.
Professor Gupta is currently a faculty at the University of Alabama. Professor Gupta has published more than 75 articles in entrepreneurship and family business area, and he has recently published a book also on some of the prominent Indians titled 75 Amazing Indians. So in the context of entrepreneurship and family business, so Professor Gupta, so we'll basically have a conversation with Professor Gupta. But before getting into the conversation, let me ask Professor Gupta to basically tell us about his journey.
So thank you, Dr. Mondal. I've had a very interesting journey with many twists and turns over the years. I was born in a very small town called Talwada in Punjab. It is also in some ways a company town. The town was set up because of the Pong Dam in the region. My parents had moved to Delhi in the 1960s, and then that's where I grew up after being born in Talwada. And in Delhi, my father and mother sent me to a very good school called Springdale School in Delhi, which is one of the top schools in Delhi. And in that school, when I look back, I realized that we were privileged enough that Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Yasser Arafat, these were the kind of visitors that school used to attract. And at that time, of course, I had no appreciation for these things. I thought this was normal for every school. And after my 12th, back then the emphasis was on engineering. And the only college I could get into was Government Engineering College, Bhatinda. So from an elite school in Delhi, I went completely in the other direction at this Government Engineering College in Bhatinda. And at that GEC Bhatinda, which is now called Gyani Zail Singh College of Engineering and Technology, named after our former president, I got to learn and see life on the very ground. In the local community at that time, people didn't even know what BTech was. They used to say, "Aap SDO banne wala course kar rahe ho," and that kind of sort of thinking was prevalent in that area. All through this, it was a given that I will join my family business. My father had started a business called Yesco, which makes workshop machinery. And it was a given that his next generation would join that business, especially me being the eldest son. Which is what I did. Throughout college, whenever I went back home, I went to the family business. My father was very particular that the next generation, especially his oldest son, should start coming to the factory at a young age. So I started going at 16 or 16 and a half after my 10th. And throughout college, I did go. And I started, the day I finished my engineering degree, I didn't appear for any placements, I didn't appear for any exams. That was not even on the agenda. And I remember we were all so happy that finally education has finished. And now we move to the next phase of life, which is the business. And I joined the business and I started working in the business. And at that time, I experienced something that I had never really paid much attention to, and which I only realized sort of later: intergenerational conflict in family businesses. I'd never heard that phrase before. I had not heard that phrase even when I was going through it. I heard that phrase after I became a professor. So at that time, I couldn't understand what was going on. I knew there was conflict, but I had no clue how to deal with it and how to resolve it and what my options were. And sort of to cut a long story short, I decided to go overseas for my further studies, leave the business, which was very disappointing for both me and my father, to be honest. Neither he nor I was happy with the outcome, but neither of us knew how to deal with the situation. And so I left. And once I left, once I got into the PhD, then it became apparent that sort of I have a different path. So then I started doing the PhD. And from the day first of PhD, I knew it was going to focus on entrepreneurship and strategy because that was the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything else about business other than entrepreneurship. And even the word strategy was not really in my book because in the small businesses we have in India, nobody really thinks about strategy. It is about more day to day. But then I did the PhD. I found some very good mentors during the PhD program. They guided me. And then I took up a faculty job, wrote, published. And the typical faculty role sort of that is now also prevalent in India is research, teaching, service. And that's the path I took. Now it's been 22 years on this path. And here I am.
Very, very interesting journey. So in fact, a lot of things for me to pick. When you said Springdale, say you went to Springdale School and then you saw me, Nelson Mandela, Yasser Arafat. So I was thinking, I started my schooling in a Hindi medium school. Then I went to English medium school later in my life. And we never had visitors like the ones. These are legendary leaders of the last century and we have read about them in the school books. And then you went to engineering. Engineering, but then you joined the family business and then took a very different turn to go to academics. So very interesting, I think, journey, and which I think there's an insight for many of us. That often when the profession we land up in, it's not the profession we start. I don't think when you would have gone to engineering college, you would have dreamed of that 20 years later, I would be sitting in a US business school talking about entrepreneurship.
Right. I think at that age, you don't, at least in my circle, which is the Agarwal community which I belong to, nobody thought about becoming a professor, at least in my cousins. People had small businesses of various degrees, or they were in some kind of government job, but there was really no culture of sort of becoming a professor. That was not even on the agenda. So you're very right, I'd never thought about that before.
So connecting with that, so how has this entrepreneurial landscape in India changed over the last 2 decades?
Yeah, so during your time, when you started joined your father's family business, and now that you're teaching the exact course, that 20, 25 years, India has gone through a lot of change. World has gone through a lot of change. So, as my colleague mentioned, how do you see that landscape? What's different now? What's similar now?
See, one of the things I think most people don't understand about India is, in some ways, we are the small business capital of the world. If you look at the per capita small businesses in this country, formal, informal, any kind, that's probably the highest in the world. Because every family will have some members, extended or nuclear, who are running some kind of small business. Formal, informal, leave that aside. So we are the small business capital of the world. Where we have struggled is sort of scaling it up, that's one. And second, making that starting of business an attractive option. It has mostly been that if you get an education, you go work for the government in my father's generation. And in the later generation, my generation, if you study, you go work for a private sector company like the Tatas, which we are sitting here in Jamshedpur. And after my time, it was sort of more like you go work for these sort of, Infosys, HCL, these new age companies, back then, new age. What I think has happened in the last 20 years is startup and entrepreneurship has become a glamorous word in India as well. And people like the idea of entrepreneurship and startup. Even though as the small business capital of the world, we've always had startups. We've always had entrepreneurship. But it has become more attractive for the young generation now. Although they forget our long history and legacy in terms of small business and entrepreneurship.
I think it's very interesting you bring out that India has been the small business capital, and the importance of small businesses and the importance of informal economy. Because often I have had these conversations. The traditional, when I look into the literature, a lot of emphasis has gone on the formal businesses. But India's pulse is in the informal sector, whichever sector we look into, shops, waste management, other sectors of economy. And do you think those are underappreciated in West or under recognition? Or perhaps within India, we don't value the sort of impact small businesses, small startups have on Indian
So I think there's two dimensions to that question. First is, in India, I think itself, we undervalue or underappreciate the informal entrepreneurship. One of my PhD students is working on a project looking at how competition from informal firms forces formal firms to innovate, because informal firms are competing on price generally. So, and as she and I were discussing this project, one of the best insights I got into it was sitting in my father's office talking to one of his suppliers who supplies rubber products. And he told me that there are so many informal players in the rubber segment that the only way he can be competitive is by offering new and novel products, is by introducing innovations, both process and product. And I immediately sent an email to my students saying, here's an example, here's what I learned. See if you can incorporate this in the paper. It brings more life than just looking at data. You are bringing in examples on how this works. So I think in India we underappreciate sort of the role and the importance of informal economy. I think we also underappreciate that informal business also exists in other parts of the world. So my PhD student, the data she picked was from European countries. And she's looking at, I think she was telling me it varies from about 10 to 30% of the GDP in the country is coming from informal economies in some of these European countries. So I think we underestimate that as well. You also said, something about the small businesses. I think we've always underappreciated the importance of small businesses, even formal. Forget informal for a second, even formal. Small businesses, we underappreciate the importance. For example, my father tells me that one of the grinding machines he started making, before he started making those, used to come from Russia. So in a lot of these ordnance factories, and the machines were being supplied from foreign countries. When domestic manufacturers started making those machines, it replaced what we were importing. But this is not, the large firm. These are just small companies.
So in other words, you were basically saying that these Indian small businesses, they actually helped India to implement the import substitution policy.
Yeah, but back then, I don't know if they were actually talking about make in India or import substitution. I don't think that, but it helped create the infrastructure.
But the insight, I think, get from Professor Gupta, this is an aspect which we should be at least bringing it more to our classrooms.
Yes.
The students that we have had the fortunate enough to teach in our classes, even they go through these management schools without recognizing the value of these small businesses, whether formal, informal, and the role they play in making Indian economy more resilient. Whether bringing it through discussions like these, you mentioned about the rubber industry, where intense competition forces you to innovate.
Right.
And I think
intense competition from informal
from the informal, those who are under-recognized, those who perhaps are invisible.
Right.
I think good.
And maybe over the period of time, some of them can export those products outside the world.
That I think doesn't exist. That vision, that training, that way of thinking is what is missing.
So there, perhaps now let me bring in the dimension of where do you think the vision is missing? Is it because of non-supportive public policy ecosystem, or is it because of some other structural issues in the market, or is it to do with the small businesses per se who don't want to or don't have the resources to perhaps expand outside India?
I think it's all three. I think there are issues of support. I think there are structural issues in the economy. And I think it's also the lack of vision, the lack of coaching. So, if I look at my father, he didn't get much of a formal education. He started the business, right? And he wanted his next generation to get an education and come into the business. But that means a mindset has to also change in the previous generation to absorb your next generation who's coming in with the education. And the next generation who's also coming in with the education also needs to realize that these informal entrepreneurs have a lot of things that the educated ones can learn from. So both these things have to happen, right? I don't think we have that in our colleges, in our universities outside of that in our social system. I don't think we have that.
Maybe we need to bring those learnings in the classroom. So that students can learn.
And in classrooms also, and I think also in the public discourse, maybe through initiatives like Strategic Insights, or maybe through larger conversations, newspapers and magazine articles, modern scope. The other stream of research that Professor Vishal Gupta is into is family business. And just a short while ago, Professor Arindam, Gupta, I, and along with some of our colleagues and some students from XLRI, we went to Tata Steel Center for Excellence, which is just next door to XLRI, and where we went to archives of how the city was set up, how the steel sector was set up, how the industrial sector came in India. So, any quick thoughts, Professor Gupta, about that, and then later on to family business?
I think centers like the one we went to, the Center for Excellence, you could see the students were impressed, the students who were with us, we were all impressed. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that we all learned something that we didn't know before. But centers like that need to exist all around the country. We have many, many good business houses, business groups, family businesses that are at that level. Godrej has, Birlas have, that kind of family business. Now the Ambanis, the Adanis. But we don't have this culture of, as the archivist at that center was telling us also, this idea of preserving our legacy and then sharing it with the future generations of our family, but also the common public. But the common public, I mean like the educated MBAs, the PhD students, the young generation of academics, the tourists who come to Jamshedpur or to any of these other places. I think we need that in our culture.
And I think a conversation that we were having just around lunchtime today was also, again, the lack of perhaps preservation of such archives, even in field of culture, even in field of music. You're talking about Munshi Premchand or Harivansh Bachchan. Do we have archives sitting? Where did they start? What was their first initial writing? And how did they grow up? What were the things that influenced that part? Today, we know about them, but we don't know as much about the part. So do you think there are issues like this in US also? Others, or is it different?
See, I think some of the other countries, look, we are the world's 5th largest economy, right? So I'll talk about sort of other large economies, the US, UK, countries that have the economy that we have now. I think they've done a much better job of preserving their legacy and sharing it with the next generations, because they know that the next generation can look far only if they stand on the shoulders of giants who came before them. We don't have that culture. We think everything that came before, or many of us think everything that came before is useless somehow. So I think we need to create these institutions, not just in the sphere of family businesses, but even in culture. I heard the famous poet, lyricist Javed Akhtar talk about this once. He said, where are the museums to Indian writers like Munshi Premchand, like Nirala? Where are the museums and the cultural places to honor their legacy? And he said, what about in the film business? Where are the museums and centers to honor their legacy? I'm a big fan of Amitabh Bachchan ji, but I will say, why hasn't he taken an instrumental role in creating a center to honor his father's legacy? A father he respects very much. He's always said that his contributions pale in comparison to his father. But where is the museum to Harivansh Rai Bachchan? Where can we go watch the desk on which he used to sit, which I'm told Amitabh Bachchan ji has preserved? But it is not just for him. It is a national.
He might be his father, but he's also
he's a national treasure.
National treasure.
So we need that. But the Kapoor family also, today we hear about Ranbir Kapoor, Karishma Kapoor, Kareena Kapoor. But where is their celebration of Prithviraj Kapoor and the museum to the Kapoors? We need those things. And I hope that people come visit the Tata Center for Excellence and then go back and think about a Kapoor Center for Excellence in terms of films, or a Bachchan Center for Excellence in terms of poems.
Yeah, and in India being diverse country, you have had poets in all different languages, not just Hindi. So all those Braj, Avdi, Mathli, Bangla, Tamil, and without perhaps, I think now that the more I think of it, without adequate preservation,
This will be lost.
Maybe in 40, 50 years, these will be all
This will be
online.
lost. Professor Vishal Gupta, who's at IIM Ahmedabad, and I wrote this book, 75 Amazing Indians, and one of the people we write about in the book is Yasudas. And I'm told that for many people in India, millions of people, Yasudas is considered the voice of God.
Yes.
That if they could hear God speak, he would speak in the voice of Yasudas. But that voice will one day be gone. Where is the center for Yasudas where people can go in, walk in, enjoy his recordings, original recordings, learn about his life journey? We don't have that culture. We need that. We need that today.
I think another culture you talked about the importance of reading, and how important it is to read. How important it is to read, and also I think I hope some of you are also wondering about some of these things, because this discussion is making me think about the importance of preserving our national treasure, national culture in family business, in entrepreneurship, in music, art, culture.
So, Professor Bhaskar, let me give you examples of two countries. See, in a globalized world, we have to be prepared to learn good things from other countries. I think sometimes we are very resistant in learning good things, but we are very open to bad influences. So let me give you an example of a country, Iceland. So I recently visited Iceland for a trip of MBA students from our university, an executive MBA tour. And as we were getting ready for the tour, we read about Iceland. And one of the things I read about Iceland was, which I learned was true when we got there, their biggest festival is Christmas. You know what is the most common gift they give to each other on Christmas? Books. Imagine on our biggest festival, which in Delhi is Diwali, I go in my neighborhood and give people books as gifts. Right? Imagine what will people say. Okay. Then they not only give books. See, Christmas is a family holiday, which means the whole family is there. So up to 12 p.m. you are staying up. You stay up reading books. That's the cultural tradition in the family. We don't have that culture anymore. In the US, we found that when our daughter was small, people started giving us books. So I thought maybe they don't know that my daughter is too small, she doesn't know how to read. I mean, they knew the age, but I thought maybe they don't know she doesn't know how to read. And I started thinking maybe she's late in reading. All these other people's kids must be reading already. So I told them, I said, my daughter doesn't know how to read yet, and you are giving books. They looked at me and said, the books are not for her to read. They are for you to read to her. And my reaction was, there's one more thing for me to do now. I'm already so busy. But then I realized this is how you inculcate the love of reading in your kids.
I think recently in India, we have been having a lot of discourse in social media and others about the processed sugar that we eat. India being the diabetes capital of the world, and now the culture of having sweet all around us and processed food and even mithai. So when you talk about Diwali, I'm thinking we might spend 1,000, 1,500 rupees to spend on sweets to give it to one. But when it comes to spending the same amount of books, how many of us would believe is it worth spending 1,500 on a book? That what is that book all apart? So that culture. Do you think there's any obvious solution, quick fix solution for this? Because now he's American, but now this is something for us to grapple with. But how do we bring this?
So we have to learn.
Yeah.
So we have to learn the good things from other culture. That is what Professor Gupta said.
Yeah.
See, in my entrepreneurship class, I am now making students read at least one book, 200, 300 page book about entrepreneurs. And I have gone to many business schools in India over the years, but even in this trip, at least 5 or 6 business schools in India. No business school in India is expecting their students to read non-textbook books about entrepreneurs in any class. And I mean, that's one place where we can easily start, right? I have always said to everyone that one thing Gandhiji was right about is be the change you want to see. So if we think it should change, why not start bringing that change in our class? And believe me, not one of my students, and I say this with pride, I thought they were going to kill me in the student evaluations by saying, I hate this professor, he made us read 300-page book, it was a waste of time. And I say this proudly, I hope someday some of my students are watching this. Not even one complaint. They may have complained about other things, but not one complaint about reading of the book and doing an assignment based on reading the book. I think that speaks to how interested they were in reading about this. And in fact, one student told me one of the books I assigned was about conflict in family business. And he said he comes from a family business background and he could see his family in some of these conflicts.
I think a lot of takeaways from the discussion we have had so far. And trust me when I say this, these are not part of our scripted part. These are not something that we had discussed, decided to speak about. In fact, we had a paper in front of us where we had identified topics to cover. Some of those we have covered, but I think these are far more engrossing part. But I think, I think we'll try to now wrap it up so that it doesn't end up being too long for others. Any other question that you have?
So, what advice do you give to the young entrepreneurs?
I think a lot of entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs here, wait. They wait for the perfect opportunity to come. And my experience in sort of as I meet entrepreneurs in different countries is start early and start on whatever idea you think is worth it. So I think here, people are waiting, I will do this, I'll finish this stage of life, then I'll finish this stage of life. But why not start with something even in high school, even in college, even if it's part-time? Because it gives you very good experience of what are some of the common problems that will come up when you scale up the business later. The other thing is, and I was reading a really interesting book recently about the founder of Ambuja Cement. And he's from a Marwari family, and he shared this in the book. He said, up to my generation, up to his generation, the culture in these Marwari families he saw was, you went with your previous generation to the business, especially the boys, as they grew up. He said that is now declining. But when you went to the business as you were growing up, you were learning many good qualities. So now that we have, many of the families have stopped sending their younger generation, now boys and girls both, with the previous generation to the business, they are not picking up anything, but only the textbook knowledge about running a business. But that textbook knowledge is generally about how business should be, not how business is.
Yes.
And the gap, I think our young generation needs to start sooner rather than wait until much.
I think on this, maybe a follow-up to what Arindam mentioned. Now, few years back, 4-5 years back, there was a boom in startups in India. And we saw that every student in our campus and many other campuses wanted to either be a part of a startup or want to start a startup. Capital was easily available, these were suddenly glamorous, and then we were talking about 100 unicorns in a year in India. And now for last few months, we have an incidence of some of those unicorns or could have been unicorns going bust. And now we have the case of Byju's, which is in troubled waters recently. Do you think that will dampen the mood and the interest or motivation of some of these young entrepreneurs that this is too risky for us to get? Maybe will the family become more risk averse, that will not let our children go this route? Or do you think this is a natural cycle in every country when they go through this part?
See, this is a conversation that is happening in the US as well as in some academic circles as well, not only in India. I think because of the media and because of the kind of world we live in, short attention span, we have prioritized growth, which is what you saw with Byju. The whole emphasis, even in our media, was on growth. Byju is growing at this speed, at this speed, at this speed. Well, but the emphasis should be on longevity, should be on profitability, should be on how can it be sustained. I have asked, even in my own campus as well as in many academic circles, if you want to celebrate growth, that's fine, but also celebrate longevity. What about a family business that is employing for the last, 70 years or 80 years or 90 years, 50 to 60 people, creating stable jobs for 50 to 60 people? Why are we not celebrating that in our classrooms? Why are we not celebrating that in our case studies?
I think I read it somewhere, or I heard it from somewhere, who talked about that. Look into which were the top 100 firms in 1920s, and how many of those firms exist today? 90% don't exist today. So just like humans have a life, maybe firms have a life, and maybe some of these startups, as you're saying, because they prioritize growth, they're like make hay while the sun shines.
Sure, and I'm not saying that's wrong. Maybe at some level that is right. But notice, in a world where firms have a life, isn't there something to learn from a firm that has survived for 200 years or 100 years, like the Tatas? Right? What has allowed the Tatas or the Birlas to survive in a world where most firms disappear over a period of time?
No, but are those founders? Does longevity excite them as much as growth?
Well,
See,
what excites us? What we pick up from the media, what we pick up from people around us, what we pick up in the classroom. In business schools, the whole emphasis is on growth. We've even come up with the word unicorn, right? Which is to describe these growth-oriented firms that reach a certain valuation. Where is our glamorous word for firms that are staying alive for 100 years? It is all in what we choose to celebrate.
So in a way, are you saying this is a societal part where perhaps we focus more on instant gratification, instant Maggie, instant noodles, instant happiness, everything instant growth,
instant startups, instant unicorns? I think it is. I'm not saying all that is wrong. Perhaps any entrepreneurial venture like Baiju, even when it crashes, has created some value along the way, even if it's for a limited number of people, and provided some job opportunities for people. So I'm not saying all that is wrong, but I'm saying we also need to celebrate the other side. But I think in celebrating the growth-oriented firms, we completely left our focus. We completely ignored the other side of businesses, which is stable, good, sound businesses that are doing well over generations.
So, Professor Gupta, how can entrepreneurs build a resilient business model in the Indian context?
I think that's a very difficult question.
So I think we are coming to the end of this. So I think this was our bouncer of a sort. So
Right.
you can give a short response.
I'm not sure I have a response for this.
I think so. Let us bring this conversation, this very engaging conversation, on this note where Professor Arindam asked a question, and which we leave all of you to think over, and how do we bring resilience to the system. And maybe next time we are fortunate enough to have Professor Vishal Gupta here, we'll perhaps start with the next round of this. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. It was a pleasure having you here on campus, engaging in conversation with our students, with some of us, and all of you out present there. Thank you so much for patiently listening, following us. We'll be back with the next edition soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.